What horrifying Halloween nights? 1. Candyman, Houston, 1974. Halloween night, 1974. In a rain-soaked suburb of Houston, Ronald Clark O'Brien walked his 2 children and a neighbor boy door to door, umbrellas up, pillowcases out. They hit a house that didn't answer. Minutes later, O'Brien reappeared, holding 5 giant pixie sticks, paper tubes of sour sugar, and said a rich neighbor had opened the door at the last second. Back home, bedtime loomed. 8-year-old Timothy begged for one more piece of candy. His father handed him a pixie sticks, helped tear it open past a strange staple at the top, and watched his son tip the bitter powder into his mouth. Cyanide works fast. Timothy gagged that it tasted wrong. O'Brien offered a drink. Within seconds, the boy was vomiting, his small body locking into convulsions on the bathroom floor as his mother screamed for help. The smell of almonds, sometimes the only warning, hung in the air. By the time the ambulance doors slammed, Timothy's pulse was a stuttering flicker. He was pronounced dead less than an hour after trick-or-treating. In the panic that followed, police raced to find the other 4 pixie sticks O'Brien had given to neighborhood kids. Miraculously, all were recovered unopened. One child had fallen asleep clutching the tube he couldn't pry past the staple. What began as every parent's nightmare unraveled into something colder. Detectives learned O'Brien was deep in debt and had recently taken out multiple life insurance policies on his children. The candy had been tampered with at home. The top cut. Powder replaced with a lethal dose of cyanide. The end resealed with a staple. The mystery house didn't exist. Neighbors hadn't seen a generous stranger. They'd seen only O'Brien. The prosecution called him what he was, a man who turned a folk fear into a method and his son into a payout. In court, he showed little remorse. The jury needed less than an hour. O'Brien was executed by lethal injection in 1984, and Houston parents taught their kids a new phrase, the Candyman, the man who killed Halloween. The horror of this case isn't an urban legend about random malice from a stranger. It's the image of a child dying from a trick handed to him by the person he trusted most. A death that was quiet, clinical, and planned. Every year since, as parents sort through candy under bright kitchen lights, the fear that flickers at the edge of memory traces back to one bitter mouthful and a paper tube sealed with a staple. 2. Halloween decoration was a real person. Delaware, 2005. Halloween week, 2005. In the small town of Frederica, Delaware, porches wore store-bought cobwebs, plywood tombstones leaned in patchy yards, and orange lights blinked against the gray of an early morning. Along a busy roadside, commuters spotted what looked like an especially committed display. A figure hanging from a tree branch, clothes stirring in the weak coastal wind. Drivers slowed, stared, and rolled on. A school bus passed. Some neighbors even complimented the realism. It wasn't a prop. It was a woman, middle-aged, local, who had died by suicide in the hours before dawn. For a while, the world continued around her. Engines idled at a nearby stop sign. A mail truck clattered over a manhole. And the line between decoration and death stayed intact because no one expected the worst on a weekday morning. The figure's stillness read as theatrics, not finality. Only later, when someone crossed the grass for a closer look, did the details refuse to blur, the slackness in the hands, the pallor that no makeup could mimic, the silence that wasn't performance. A 911 call cut through the routine. Police arrived, taped off the tree, and lowered the body with care. Paramedics confirmed what the scene already told them. Detectives found no sign of foul play. The medical examiner ruled the manner of death a suicide and notified the family. By then, the sun was high enough to throw the whole street into a too bright relief. The bright plastic pumpkins, the cartoony skeletons, and, at the center of it all, a real human absence. What makes this case so haunting isn't gore or spectacle, it's the terrible disguise. A public death hid in plain sight because the season trained everyone to expect imitation. The instinct to look away became complicity, and a community's morning commute doubled as an accidental procession passed a stranger's last moment. Every Halloween since, the story resurfaces as a cautionary whisper. Check twice, don't assume. And remember that behind the theater of the holiday, someone's pain might be standing right there, still and unacknowledged, in the harsh light of day. 3. Halloween Party Shooting, California, 2019. On Halloween night, 2019, what was billed on Instagram as an Airbnb mansion party in Orinda, California, swelled far beyond control. By 10 p.m., more than 100 people were crammed into a rented hillside home. The owner had been told it was a small family gathering, and neighbors had already called about noise. Inside, the base was heavy, costumes were bright, and for a few minutes, it felt like a harmless house party that got too big. Then the lights cut through fog from a smoke machine. A scuffle sparked near the kitchen, and sudden muzzle flashes turned music into panic. In a house jammed with bodies and narrow sightlines, the first bursts of gunfire ricocheted off tile and drywall. People dove, tripped, and stampeded for the back deck as rounds kept coming. Responding deputies arrived to a scene that looked like the aftermath of a collapse. Only the collapse was invisible. Shock, silence, and too many people not getting up. 5 young people would not leave that house alive. 22-year-old Tyon Farley, 24-year-old Omar Taylor, 23-year-old Ramon Hill Jr., 29-year-old Javin County, and 19-year-old Oceana Tompkins. Paramedics worked the triage grid on the driveway as friends screamed names into phones that no one answered. The victims' wounds were the blunt, clinical realities of close-quarters gunfire, fatal trauma to the torso, catastrophic bleeding, deaths measured in minutes despite a wall of flashing lights. In the chaos, you can picture the eerie Halloween set, dressing still clinging to doorways, while investigators laid down numbered placards beside shell casings and abandoned shoes. The party had promised a night of masks. The morgue would have the last word on identities. The shooting didn't just rattle Orinda. It forced a reckoning with the way party culture had been grafted onto short-term rentals. Within 48 hours, Airbnb publicly announced a ban on party houses and moved to tighten enforcement, a corporate response written in the stark language of litigation and loss. That policy shift, born from a single address on a narrow street, was an admission that platform promises meet their limits when a flyer travels faster than a host's rules. The house could be delisted. The neighborhood could breathe again. But 5 families would be left with funerals instead of explanations. The official counts and press releases can't show you the most haunting detail. How quickly celebration can flip into a kind of suspended silence. The stillness after sirens when the last victim is pronounced and the evidence tape droops in the night breeze. There were no monsters at Orinda, just guns in a crowd and the terrible arithmetic that follows. 4. Indiana Coliseum explosion, 1963. Halloween night, 1963. The Indiana State Fairgrounds Coliseum in Indianapolis was packed for Holiday on Ice, a bright, wholesome spectacle of sequins and smoke machines. Parents pointed out the skaters to their kids. Couples settled into the rink-side bleachers with paper cups of coffee. Under those same seats, out of view, a concession stand stored liquefied petroleum gas for warming food. Propane is heavier than air. When it leaks, it sinks, spreads, and waits. Sometime near the show's finale, gas pooled in the service pit below the south stands found an ignition source, most likely a pilot light or a heating element. The first blast didn't roar so much as heave. Concrete seemed to jump. A section of bleachers lifted then folded, and people disappeared in a rush of smoke, shattered seating, and twisted rail. The ice itself rippled white with dust. In the stunned quiet that follows a detonation, you could hear a skater's blade grinding to a stop. Spectators bolted toward the aisles. Others climbed down into the void to pull strangers out. Then, minutes later, a second ignition. Another pocket of gas detonated beneath the wreckage. The aftershock felled rescuers and stunned those still on their feet. Lights flickered. The public address system went silent. What had been a rink became a mass casualty scene. Overturned benches, concrete chunks, a snow of insulation and paper programs settling over people calling out names that weren't answered. Death here was not theatrical. It was blunt and immediate. Those closest to the concession pit suffered crushing trauma and fatal burns. Others succumbed to blast injuries and asphyxiation when dust and fumes replaced breathable air. The randomness was merciless. One row spared, the next annihilated. In the chaos, doctors and firefighters worked shoulder to shoulder with off-duty soldiers and strangers in their Sunday best, improvising tourniquets, using the team entrance as a triage line, and turning family sedans into ambulances when there weren't enough sirens to go around. By the following morning, hospitals across the city were still processing the wounded. The death toll has risen to dozens dead and hundreds injured. An entertainment venue transformed, in seconds, into one of the worst indoor disasters in American history. Investigators traced the cause to propane that should never have been allowed to pool beneath a seated crowd. Building and fire codes would be rewritten. Propane use in arenas would be sharply curtailed. Inspections would no longer be a formality. What lingers is the dissonance. A holiday show on ice, a date circled on family calendars. A date circled on family calendars. And an invisible gas collecting under the bleachers until it found the flame. The terror of that night isn't just the explosion itself. It's the knowledge that the danger was already in the room, silent and patient, while the audience applauded.